All right, you're ready whenever.
What's going on, guys? What is going on, people, technicians out there? Welcome to the shop. Welcome to the show. You know what it is. Welcome to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast. My name is Eitan Mosier. I'm here, as always, with Sam Stompy Lane. Say what's up, Sam.
What's up, Sam? I'm not even a dad, and I did a dad joke.
It's a terrible person. Oh, my God. I have to deal with this shit all the time. Somebody help me.
That was awesome.
Anyway, we are on the Dynasty Trade Calculator family of podcasts. You already know that. And we are brought to you by Fantasy Data. We are going to go over some of the happenings for Week 8 and Week 9. We apologize for not being able to bring an episode to you guys last week. We had some technical difficulties, as in my computer decided to just not be a computer anymore and have a black screen, and it was just not good. So I Geek Squatted, and now we're back here, and we're going to jump right into what is happening with the Los Angeles Rams because of the Brandon Cooks injury. Now, the issue with Brandon Cooks isn't that he isn't getting through concussion protocols, as I hear it so far. It's that he continuously gets these concussions, and then the next day, nothing is actually read when the doctors examine him. So the issue is they're wondering if there's something else going on with Brandon Cooks, and as a result of that, he's day-to-day, and I think he's unlikely to play for the foreseeable future. I mean, this definitely opens up a lot of targets in an offense that is going to be down one of their main playmakers, and we're obviously going to talk about the impact of that. But before we get into the actual repercussions of this situation, let's just comment on where Brandon Cooks goes from here. I mean, this is his second recorded concussion of the season. I don't believe it's his first concussion so far in his career. In fact, I know that's not the case because of the very highly publicized concussion he suffered against the Patriots. Brandon Cooks has been going through this for a long, long time. And is this a situation where, I mean, almost like Jordan Reed at this point, are we worried about this guy long-term as a football player, and besides that, just as a human being?
I mean, I think you have to be. I know that, and don't quote me here because I am not a doctor. Talk to guys like Ethan Turner and Matt Betts, but the more concussions you get, the more susceptible you are to them. I mean, we're seeing the same thing with Sterling Shepard. Like you said, we see the same thing with Jordan Reed. We've seen some we'll call them premature retirements because of concussions. And yeah, I mean, with everything that's going on, and with the fact that they don't really necessarily know what's going on, it's kind of a scary situation. And it's something that, yeah, we need to be concerned about, both in terms of dynasty long-term, but in terms of human beings, we need to be concerned about his health. And honestly, and I don't have any Brandon. I have one share of Brandon Cooks in like across all of my leagues. It's so I don't really have a stake here, but like, it's just one of those things where it's like, dude, if this is going to affect your day-to-day life, you've made enough money at this point, you need to get out. Like, you need to live your life and not worry about what happens when you're 40, 50, 60 years old.
Yeah, it's definitely been a trying time for Brandon Cooks so far in the league. This is his fifth concussion overall. I actually looked it up while you were speaking there. And I mean, Brandon Cooks signed a 5-year, $81 million contract with the Los Angeles Rams just a few seasons ago. He is tied to that team for the foreseeable future. The only way that money is going to go is if he retires. And I don't necessarily know if, I mean, that's not really a decision that you can make for anybody else. He has to decide that for himself. But it looks like between both Brandon Cooks and Todd Gurley, I mean, it seems like we talk about this every week now. The Rams have salary problems, major salary problems tied up in players that may not be nearly as productive as they were thought to be at the time of signing those contracts. So, I mean, what does this mean for this Rams team as a whole? Now they have no picks. They have to kind of adapt on the fly and use the players that they had in the house. This leads directly, for me at least, to Gerald Everett, who's already been pretty involved in that offense as of late. He's been one of those guys that's had boom and bust weeks so far this year, but he's actually led the team in targets in a number of games so far this season. Is Gerald Everett streamable weekly now with the expected Brandon Cooks not being available for at least the next couple games and potentially beyond?
I think he's more than streamable. I mean, at this point, I believe this is year 3 for him. He has a lot of good games. He actually, the bad games are the exception here, I suppose. And the way that the Rams offense has kind of shifted, they are playing a lot of 12 personnel. If you look at their snap counts, you're seeing both Higbee and Everett getting significant snaps in every game. And a lot with both of them on the field. I mean, last week, Higbee played in 55% of the snaps, and Gerald Everett played in 48. The previous week, 74 to 64. So you're seeing a lot of 12 personnel where you saw a lot of 11 personnel the season before, and so I mean, you're going to see Gerald Everett getting those opportunities. Right now, he's only the tight end 15, but we've seen over the last 5 games, we've seen his usage climb, and he's got 3 games of 15 or more fantasy points. He's got 3 or more targets in each of the last 5 games and 5 or more in 4 of the last 5. He's gotten 5 or more in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games out of 8 this season. So I think Everett has been getting a role, a larger role, and I think it increases here, especially with what seemingly was one of the main options, at least last year. Now I think that a lot of that goes to those tight ends.
Just schematically, it seems like the Rams kind of had a very, very specific type of personnel that they wanted to put in certain situations. They wanted Brandon Cooks to be the clear out guy and to be the deep threat, to make sure that the defense can't load the box for Todd Gurley and for those shorter routes to Cooper Kupp, who is their slot receiver. And then Robert Woods was kind of that jack of all trades. Now I think Robert Woods, just because of, I guess, a lack of alternatives here, has to slot into that Brandon Cooks kind of deep threat role, just because of, the relation of speed between him and the rest of the guys on that team. I do think he still has the edge over Cooper Kupp in that regard. And if that's the case, then, Gerald Everett can see a lot of intermediate work. Gerald Everett can be that guy who is almost another possession target for them, instead of trying to be that guy that is really involved on those big plays, like has kind of been what we've seen so far through his career. I think that this is a big for Gerald Everett. I think this is big for the Los Angeles Rams. I think this is big for any owners like myself that are going to have to figure out what to do with Evan Ingram this week, having a guy like Gerald Everett on the bench.
By the way, Ingram may be done for the season if it's the same foot issue as Cam Newton.
We're hearing different things. We're hearing different things from different places from Evan Ingram. We're hearing from him that he's going to be out a game or two. We're also hearing that it could potentially be a Liz Frank injury. But he came out and said something after the announcement of the potential Liz Frank injury that made it seem like it was something less serious. But of course, that's believing the player over the other knowledge out there, and they might be a little bit more optimistic than is really usable for us figuring out what to do from a fantasy perspective. But yeah, I do think that Gerald Everett is going to be in that brand of tight ends that you can feel comfortable starting every week, and he's not going to lose it for you too many times so far this year. You talked about it being year 3 for Gerald Everett. He has one more year after this with the Rams, and we often talk about this being a normal TE growth curve. It usually takes these guys until their second contracts, very close until the second contracts before they're a finished product in the NFL. And I think Gerald Everett is getting there and now has been blessed with this perfect opportunity to just mop up extra targets in Los Angeles as they try to keep up with the rest of that division. Now, we have to go to, again, the QB apocalypse that is going on in the league so far this season. We're seeing Nick Foles come back this week, but we're also seeing Jacoby Brissett, who took over for the retired Andrew Luck, go down this week. And we're potentially seeing Patrick Mahomes, but all of these guys are dealing with injuries. Cam is shut down for the year now. What is going on with the league as a whole with these quarterbacks, and does the loss of Jacoby Brissett really truly hinder the Indianapolis Colts' chances so far this season, or do we think that this is a team that kind of already experienced this once and can just kind of find ways to win with Reich moving forward?
I think the bigger issue is T.Y. Hilton being out. Brissett brings, I guess, a level of athleticism that Brian Hoyer can't. I think Jacoby Brissett is practicing in a limited fashion. I guess we'll see what happens, but yeah, I think the going from Andrew Luck to Jacoby Brissett is a bigger drop than Jacoby Brissett to Brian Hoyer. And that's not to try and diminish Jacoby Brissett's skills, but we're talking about Andrew Luck, one of the best quarterbacks to ever come into the NFL over the past decade, or even probably over the past 20 years. And so to drop from Luck to Brissett, pretty big drop, but from Brissett to Hoyer, not nearly as big of a drop. But I think the bigger issue, like I said, is losing T.Y. Hilton, because now you have Zach Pascal as your wide receiver one. Your tight ends really aren't getting involved, though. Jack Doyle has had 2 good games the last 2 weeks. And I believe Ebron had that touchdown catch. Was that 2 weeks ago or 2 games ago?
Yeah.
So maybe they can mitigate that loss, but they need, I think, better overall weapons in order for them to be quote unquote scary. And respect to Frank Reich for everything he's been able to do with this team, but the Colts just aren't that scary with Jacoby Brissett at QB. So either they need better weapons around him, somebody along with T.Y. Hilton, maybe Paris Campbell next year, I don't know, a better running back, no offense to Marlon Mack, and then they become a little bit more formidable. But yeah, right now with Brissett or Hoyer, they're just not nearly as formidable in the NFL.
Yeah, I don't think that this team is well-rounded enough to be able to sustain itself in light of all these injuries and Andrew Luck's sudden retirement. But I do think that there is still value to be mined there. If T.Y. sits, I think we can expect continued touchdowns to both of the tight ends, and Jack Doyle and Eric Ebron over the next few games as well. And I think that's going to be the only way that they're going to be able to stay in games. If Brian Hoyer starts to throw interceptions, if he starts to put them in situations where they're down, they're going to have to pass more to be able to even compete in whatever games that they're playing. So this might be a situation to kind of monitor. I would throw out this last name before we move away from the Colts completely. Zach Pascal, is there anything to him? There's a major difference between what he was able to do last week in terms of having Jacoby Brissett under center for part of the game, and then having Brian Hoyer under center for the rest of the game. There was a stark difference in his level of effectiveness. Is that just a situation where, this kind of happened in game and it's just hard to make that adjustment at that time? Or do we think that maybe he's going to be less involved now with Brian Hoyer in the game moving forward?
I don't know. Him being the wide receiver one now, I think puts a bigger target on his back. That means that he drew Casey Hayward last week, who's a premier cornerback in the league. I don't know who they play this week, but it like I said, paints a bigger target for him. And that's going to be an issue because like guys with like T.Y. Hilton, they have the Dolphins this week, so maybe not that big of a deal, especially because Xavier Howard isn't really playing. So maybe not a big deal this week, but if T.Y. Hilton sees an extended time away or not playing, then it becomes an issue because he will start to face those cornerback ones, and that means that he's less likely to be effective. And Chester Rogers is probably a guy that you should be targeting.
For just a moment now, let's move into next season and kind of thinking about how we plan to build our teams then. There are a couple of guys who have suffered some injuries at the end of this season that we're now going to wonder about during the offseason if we want to roster these guys at depressed values for potential big gains moving forward. Cam Newton, you already mentioned, is one of them. Kerryon Johnson is another. Do we think that there is, value to be had here? Is this a situation where you just don't really want to trade for injured running backs because anything can happen at that point? And Cam Newton, for all it's really worth, is a quarterback who is most effective on the ground. Or do we think that these are guys that you might be able to buy at depressed values during this offseason that might lead you to future titles? Just to give some stats about Kerryon Johnson so far this season, before he went down with the injury, before he was shut down, placed on IR, 20.8% juke rate, 34th in the league. He was 32nd in evaded tackles, only 50th in big run rate. Yards created was only number 32, and he seemed to be sharing a backfield often with whoever else was thrown out in the Detroit backfield. Is this what Matt Patricia is? Is he's going to rotate those backs, and is there not much value to be had there? And can Cam Newton reemerge on another team, namely the Chicago Bears, hopefully, and be a league-winning or at least the top 5 quarterback all over again?
So the thing on Kerryon, the interesting part for me is that we were all worried because of the Darrell Bevell hire and his propensity to run the ball or be more run heavy than we've seen in the past from the Lions. And here we are. Matt Stafford is a top 7 quarterback again.
He leads the league in passing yards, I believe, or at least passing yards per game.
Yeah, and granted, their defense has not been good, and they've definitely had to throw to stay in games. But it's very funny to me, even when Kerryon was healthy, that he wasn't getting the play that we thought he would, and Matt Stafford was still throwing the ball a ton. So yeah, that's funny to me that we didn't see it even when Kerryon was healthy. So I think that's an indication here is that they aren't going to be nearly as run heavy as we thought. And I think we've said it, especially early on when Kerryon wasn't getting the play, was it looks like Matt Patricia wants to build the Patriots 2.0 in Detroit. And that means having 3-4 running backs any given game getting fantasy points. Kerryon is the best running back they have, but J.D. McKissick has been effective. Ty Johnson
who knows what happens next year
there, but yeah, and then you have to consider the 2020 class and how deep the 2020 class is at running back. They could very easily get another very good running back who could split time with Kerryon. So you can, that's tough. So I just traded Kerryon and DeAndre Hopkins for, I believe it was Julio Jones and Todd Gurley in a win now league. And so that tells me that Kerryon's still worth a relative. He's still worth a lot right now, at least a 2021st plus, like probably 2021st and 2022nd. Is he worth that? I don't know, because like I said, that 2020 class is super deep and super good, like really good at running back specifically. So I don't know if you can get him at the right price, sure, for Kerryon, but it's tough to say right now, especially with his injury history. having 2 season-ending injuries in his first 2 seasons in the NFL, having injury history in college, even going back, and if you talk to Ethan Turner, even going back to high school, he was injured, is a big issue. So if you can buy low, but I don't know who's going to be selling low, just because of name alone. And then on Cam, I'm done. I can't. If his legs are getting taken away from him, and I don't know if this foot issue is going to continue to be a thing, but he's getting up there in age. He runs like a running back. Like, he's not Lamar Jackson in that he's fast enough to avoid tackles and he's just elusive. That's not Cam Newton. Cam Newton's a big body who's not that elusive, and he gets hit. And he's not nearly the quarterback if he doesn't have his legs. He's not as good of a passer. So I would be getting out if I could.
Do you think the Cam going to injury reserve issue is more of a failure for Cam Newton for, really getting that team to buy into him going forward in the face of good play from a backup quarterback? Or is it just a financial situation where, Brandon Allen is a quarterback that's under contract for the next 3 seasons that, next to nothing for a quarterback. He's a late round pick and he's playing decently. Cam Newton is owed $19 million next year. Of course, after that, there's nothing left, but you can do a lot with $19 million in the offseason if you're going to rebuild that team in another way. Do you think that maybe that had something to do with it, and that there's a potential that this Cam injury is a little bit overblown? It seemed to me that might be the case just because of Ron Rivera's reactions when people were asking him questions on whether or not that, Josh Allen is the quarterback going forward, period, for this team.
They wish they had Josh Allen. You meant Kyle Allen.
Kyle Allen.
They would have had Cam Newton 2.0. They would have had the white Cam Newton. But it's probably a mix of both. It sounded like he hasn't done anything since week 2. Like, he's been doing some stuff on the sideline, but not enough to get on the field to practice. He hasn't even started any type of rehab, really. So, or at least that's the news coming out of Carolina. But yeah, I do think there is a financial thing here where you have Christian McCaffrey, who, yes, has 2 more seasons on his contract, but the way that the league is starting to go, where players are holding out for new contracts before their contracts are up, maybe they want to extend Christian McCaffrey before then. You also have Curtis Samuel coming up, I believe, after next season. You have DJ Moore coming up. Was he a 2nd round pick or was he first?
I think he was in the first, so he still has a 5th year on top of that. So
okay.
He's tied for a little while.
So, but point still stands, and Ian Thomas, even he only has a 4-year contract. Like, you have a lot of contracts coming up in the next couple 3 years, and you could use that money. And we've seen it. Like, I think the new way that teams are run is that you win with a cheap or rookie contract, or a quarterback who's cheap or on their rookie deal, and sign the players around him to win. And if Cam's not going to be effective, and it might be one of those things where it's like, well, he's not a good passer. He hasn't been a good passer. Okay, sorry. I should retract that. He hasn't been a great passer to the point where if you take his legs away from him, he is going to still be a good quarterback. That threat of running makes him a good quarterback. And so if they're seeing that and they're like, well, we need to get out before anybody else knows, then that's another thing as well.
I will say that the stretch before Cam Newton got injured at the end of last season, everybody looks at the last 8 games that Cam Newton played and point to that as reason to, be very, very afraid of him. But the stretch right before that, he was one of the most effective passing quarterbacks in the league, just looking at those stats as well. So I don't think it's all done for Cam Newton, but I do share your concern about what the future implications of this can be if this Liz Frank injury really does sap his mobility, because then, yes, I don't think he's nothing though at that point. I don't think that he doesn't have the potential to be a good passer. There are a lot of people that have kind of reformed their games, and I think he's capable of doing that because he showed that he can be a good passer in ideal circumstances with wide receivers. But let's now move on to the Cincinnati Bengals. Some interesting things happening there. Joe Mixon at least had a decent game this past week. Is there a little bit of faith restored in Joe Mixon? AJ Green was said to have played or said to be up and ready to play this week by his coach, but as soon as he was interviewed, he kind of was a lot less forthcoming about when he would actually be able to play, and it's now been updated that he is questionable for this week. Is there a little bit of cat and mouse being played between the two sides of this? Do we think that AJ Green is still injured, or do we think that AJ Green is just not going to play for a team that's not going anywhere without a guarantee for any future of his health? And if AJ Green comes back, does this start to solve some of this team's problems? I mean, Ryan Finley is going to be the starting quarterback moving forward. Tyler Boyd has had some good games, but he's also had some pretty down ones in the last couple of games, specifically because of the absence of another target aside of him. So is this a situation where AJ Green kind of turns at least the offensive side of that team around enough to be fantasy relevant towards the end of the season? Or is this one of those things that you kind of stay away from and you just buy into next season knowing the talent that is there, regardless of how this one plays out?
I'm probably not touching it because I don't really like the way that Zach Taylor's implemented anything here. The fact that you don't use your pass catching running back to catch passes makes me hate you a lot. Listen, I completely understand that offensive line has been decimated, but we know that Joe Mixon can be effective through the air. And
one of the ways to slow down the rush actually is to get the ball out of the quarterback's hands really quickly.
Right. And it's just one of those things where it's like, dude, I mean, use your pass catchers. You don't – I mean, if you really think that On Tate is the second best pass catcher on this team right now, you are very sorely mistaken. Sorry, I don't, whatever that word is, because Joe Mixon is there, and I've been hitting this one on the head a lot. 8 routes a game for Joe Mixon. That is wild. Like this is much like Mike McCoy and David Johnson. Use your weapons the way they should be used. Tyler Boyd's been fine though. I mean, he's going to have probably his ups and downs, much like Juju Smith-Schuster is this season. But at the end of the day, he's still getting targets. He still plays from the slot, so he's going to get away from some of those top corners. Yes, AJ Green would be fantastic for this team, specifically Tyler Boyd.
Another target on the field. That's the issue.
Right. But at the end of the day, is he going to make that much of a difference? No, because Ryan Finley's a 4th-round rookie quarterback who, unless he is Gardner Minshew, which would be fantastic, unless he is Gardner Minshew, you're just not really expecting this team to be good this year.
Yeah, I think I kind of share that assertion with you. I just don't see it happening for the Bengals this year, but it doesn't mean that I'm not investing in them. If I can get Joe Mixon now, especially at depressed value, I would definitely be doing that because I think Joe Mixon with an offensive line that's halfway decent will be a very, very good running back. I don't think that they're going to invest heavily at that position next year because they're probably going to invest heavily at that position at the quarterback or heavily on that team at the quarterback position. That's where their top draft picks are going. So, I do think that there is still some safety to Joe Mixon's game. I'm, of course, unafraid to invest in Tyler Boyd. The volume is all I need to tell me that is something that's worth doing long term. And I think that there can still be some hope here. I just don't know if it's going to come this year. I would say that now would be the time to buy Bengals as the team is struggling, as the team is kind of starting to figure things out. Because I think people will kind of start to build up a hype train over the offseason because of the talent that we know is on that team. So I think now is the best time to do it. Now we're going to move on to another wide receiver. I mean, is it time? Have we come to the point? DeAndre Hopkins was the untouchable, unquestionable wide receiver one at the beginning of the season, at least during the offseason. If not him, it was Davante Adams. Both those guys have had their issues this year. DeAndre Hopkins, not so much on the injury table, but he's had some up and down games. And Davante Adams has had some up and down games and been hurt so far this year. Is Tyreek Hill Dynasty wide receiver one at this point, with both of them kind of falling off? What's happening with Juju Smith-Schuster and the Stephon Diggs situation?
I mean, it's tough. DeAndre Hopkins has been a lot better of late. I don't really know what's going on there is the thing that's driving me crazy. It's just like, yeah, we know Adams has dealt with injuries, though. I mean, he did have 11 targets last week, so I expect him to be back to normal after that abysmal game by Green Bay. I would say that Tyreek is still in the top 5 conversation. However you want to put them, what order you want to put them in is up to you, I suppose. I still
it's okay as long as he's at 1.
I still have Hopkins at 1. I mean, my concerns with Aaron Rodgers still exist. Yes, he's had 2 back-to-back good games before last week, but he's had a horrendous game last week. So I think he's kind of approaching kind of the twilight of his career. And what does that mean for Davante Adams? I don't know. So you have to be wary about Davante Adams. I'm not worried about Juju. We have seen him be good with Mason Rudolph, but Ben, it sounds like, should be around for a couple more seasons. So I still think Juju's a top 5.
Has to be. They don't have a first, so at least until the Trevor Lawrence era. Tyreek's still a top 5 option at this point. It's just whomever you want to put at 1, it's fine at this point. I mean, all of these guys are relatively young. All of these guys have been extremely productive. And then lest we forget Mike Evans. I mean, Mike Evans is right there. Cooper Kupp is right there. I'd rather put it as a who is a top 5 option than who is your wide receiver 1 right now, I suppose. That's fine. Tyreek Hill is wide receiver 1. And the reason that Tyreek Hill is wide receiver 1 is because Tyreek Hill made Alex Smith look like an MVP candidate for half of the season. And then he's making random quarterbacks. He's making Matt Moore look like he is serviceable in the league. Like, Tyreek Hill does this. Tyreek Hill is quarterback proof, and that's what you want out of your top wide receiver. I mean, you put in the age as well. Tyreek Hill, I don't think he's 26 years old. If he is, he's turning it this year, and that means that he's just entering his prime, just like Mike Evans, just like those other guys. Tyreek Hill has nobody that's really matching him on his team for any type of, at least the important targets, the deep shots that really give you those huge boom fantasy weeks, and he's doing that with heavy volume as well. We've seen a step back from Travis Kelce in terms of touchdowns this year. I don't anticipate Sammy Watkins is on that team next year because, as we've talked about before, his contract is of the 3-year variety that was really a 2-year deal because the last year is not guaranteed. I think they signed Tyreek Hill with the money that they had tied up in Sammy Watkins. So I think that Tyreek Hill on that team is going to be the foreseeable wide receiver 1 for as long as him and Patrick Mahomes are matched up, because I don't see anybody else that has that degree of a quality offensive mind in Andy Reid, a great quarterback in Patrick Mahomes, and a team that likes to air it out, a scheme that likes to air it out in the way that the Kansas City Chiefs do. So I think that Tyreek Hill, if he's going to do this with Matt Moore, it shows you everything you need to know. That means even if Patrick Mahomes goes down, even if this thing goes belly up, you're going to have an option with Tyreek Hill. Our issues with Juju this year, like you mentioned, aren't his. It's with the quarterback situation, but that's not something that you have to worry about. And I think that that's why he should be seen as Dynasty's wide receiver 1 moving forward.
I mean, hold on. So couldn't you say the same thing for Michael Thomas, though?
I mean, but First of all, Teddy Bridgewater versus Matt Moore.
Okay,
and then second,
not a good argument in the first place.
Teddy Bridgewater was a starting quarterback in the league. He was going to be the future of that team if not for his knee injury. People forget that. Teddy Bridgewater isn't a bad quarterback.
Neither is Matt Moore. Matt Moore led the Dolphins to the playoffs. What do you want me to do here?
Matt Moore was a backup quarterback for most of his
That's
career.
fine. That doesn't mean that Teddy. I mean, you could say the same. So would you say
Michael Thomas is the one guy that I think belongs in the conversation? But I would just say that that's the difference between those two. But when it comes to being quarterback proof, I understand where you're coming from with that comparison. That said, I would still give the edge to Tyreek because I would give the edge to Teddy Bridgewater in that.
I would also say DeAndre Hopkins is quarterback proof, but
we've seen up and down from DeAndre Hopkins in that situation.
Up and down in terms of, yeah, he had the worst quarterback. And okay, so maybe not the ultimate quarterback proof, but would you say that Tyreek Hill with Brock Osweiler and who was the other quarterback there?
I don't remember the other quarterbacks that played. Tom Savage? Tom Savage?
You think that anybody would be okay with those two as your quarterback? Do you think Tyreek Hill would have fared better?
I think DeAndre Hopkins and Tyreek Hill, I think the difference between them is an age thing. With Michael Thomas, I think that's fair because they're around the same age. I think Michael Thomas is only 1 year older, but DeAndre Hopkins has a couple of years on Tyreek that I think Tyreek still has left to fill. So, again, I think any way you come at it, this would be where I stand on it anyway.
But couldn't you also make an argument that, yeah, while there is an age thing, there is also a lot of risk with Tyreek Hill after all of the garbage that he has or has not done in his young
I'm not
life.
talking about Tyreek Hill as a person.
No, that's what I'm saying, though, is like that's something that you have to take into consideration with your dynasty values, correct?
That's tough for me. That's really tough for me because, I mean, I'm trying to see this from the perspective of the team. And the team just signed him to a new contract. The team obviously isn't worried that this was something big or that anything is going to come from this guy in the future. And if that's the case, I mean, look, I just don't see them operating this way. He was in a contract year this season. If people had serious concerns about him, like people have serious concerns about AB, and I'm not comparing the two situations in terms of what they did, but level of crazy, I don't think they would have operated in that manner. And I think that should give you some safety looking at this from a dynasty perspective.
Fair enough.
Anyway, let's now go on to, hey man, you are on the Superflex Super Show. You're one of the great hosts of the Superflex Super Show. You guys talk QBs all day. Do we have some serious worries, some serious question marks about 1 and 2 in last year's draft, Baker Mayfield and Sam Darnold on their respective teams? Now, I understand Adam Gase, maybe something can be kind of set aside for Sam Darnold because of Adam Gase. Some of the same can be said for Freddie Kitchens and his play calling so far, but we've seen some real steps back from both of these quarterbacks this season. With the talent that Baker Mayfield at least has on that team with him, do you think that his is a more dire situation than Sam Darnold because we don't see that same level, or do we think that both of these guys maybe aren't as advertised?
I think they're young second-year quarterbacks who are struggling with the speed and the play of the NFL. I'm not overly worried about either. This is, and I try not to take victory laps when I talk about Baker Mayfield because I'm trying to be a good analyst here. But this is exactly what I was talking about this preseason was pump your goddamn brakes. Seriously, like he's a second-year quarterback who now they have effectively a full season of tape on. This is why we don't write or don't give championships on paper. And we're starting to see some of Baker Mayfield's flaws. He's having issues with his accuracy. He's having issues with reading the field. There are other mitigating circumstances, like his offensive line is absolute trash. His play calling right now has not been great. And this is what happens with a quarterback and a new weapon is they don't have the chemistry. OBJ like, let's be realistic. If OBJ was with Eli Manning, he would be better off right now because they have a quote unquote chemistry, and Manning would be targeting OBJ in a lot of these moments that we see Baker going away from OBJ. So I think both of them will have good careers. Not everybody is Patrick Mahomes. Not everybody is Lamar Jackson, but Lamar Jackson has the other set of skills that he has to be a good quarterback. They are still learning. They're still young. They're not generational talents. So relax a little bit. They will be fine. They are still learning. I'm just not that worried about either one. I mean, if anybody I'm worried about is Darnold with Adam Gase, because I do not like Adam Gase as an offensive mind. But I think both are just extremely talented. They're just still in the learning process as quarterbacks.
I was going to ask you a question that I'm going to answer for myself and then ask it to you. For me, I think that the one to be more worried about is Baker Mayfield, because Baker Mayfield is, again, to me, in a much better situation than Sam Darnold is. Not saying that either of them are in great situations, but in terms of talent, and at least what we saw late last season from their play calling, even though that hasn't been the same, they're actually not doing any of the 12 stuff they do. They're trying to be an 11 personnel team for some reason this year, which isn't what the Browns were doing to great effect last season. I think Baker Mayfield is kind of the more scary of the two because he hasn't really, or he's been given some of the tools to succeed. I don't think Sam Darnold's been given any of the tools to succeed. I mean, we've already talked about Adam Gase. Adam Gase, the taco master, forever. That is just going to be an ingrained memory in everyone's mind when he's fired at the end of the season. And I just don't think that there's much talent on the offensive side of the ball in that team. We're still waiting for the eventual reveal of Chris Herndon, if he's even a thing that still exists in this world. And, I mean, besides Le'Veon Bell, there's nobody on that team that really incites any fear in anybody. So I think that there's a potential for Sam Darnold's situation to improve more than there is for Baker Mayfield next season. And if I had to choose, if gun to the head, I had to choose between both of them, I would probably pick Sam Darnold going into this offseason for next season. Not saying that I've completely given up on Baker. I just think that he's the safer choice of the two. Would that be kind of where you're coming from as well, or do you take the other side of that?
I think there's an argument to be made for Baker just in terms of intangibles, but Sam Darnold's arm talent, probably the best of the class. I mean, I know Josh Allen has a big arm, but arm talent is more than just having a big arm. It's being able to throw at different angles, be able to change up velocities, being able to loft it versus gun it in there. And I think Sam Darnold has that type of arm talent. So, God, I don't know. That's tough because, like, if you make a good point that Baker has better weapons. I mean, you have Nick Chubb. You do have Kareem Hunt coming back. Oh, God. You have OBJ. David Njoku may be coming back this year, but, I mean, he'll be a fourth-year tight end next season. Jarvis Landry's probably not there. Antonio Callaway, Rashard Higgins. Like, you have a lot of talent there. And you have two what we thought were good offensive minds in Freddie Kitchens and Todd Monken. Though,
well, one good offensive mind that's not being allowed to do his damn job.
Well, I still think Freddie Kitchens is fine offensive mind. He's got too much on his plate. Like, you're the head coach. Give it over to the successful offensive coordinator. Relax. So I'll push. Pass? I don't know. I think the more talented quarterback is Sam Darnold. The one in the better situation is Baker Mayfield. So I think I like Baker short term. I probably like Darnold long term.
All right, so now let's get into our 5-point inspection. But before we do that, let's go ahead and plug in the analyzer. Oh, no, before we do that, let's go ahead and make sure that we shout out our sponsor. We're proud to let you know that we're sponsored by one of the industry's leading NFL and fantasy research sites and fantasy data. Whether you want to consistently hear from some of the community's most trusted voices, check out their advanced efficiency and player performance metrics, or populate your own personal projection models, they've definitely got something for you. The Dynasty Trade Calculator Network has got you covered with our exclusive code, Dynasty20. All you have to do is go over to Fantasy Data, type in Dynasty20. That'll get you 20% off of everything on their site. Again, that's Dynasty20, and we will see you at Fantasy Data this year. Let's jump into our 5-point inspection. And now that we have the opportunity to jump in our 5-point inspection, I'm going to come out with a zinger. I'm going to come out with something that I think that is hot, but it's plausible. Preston Williams went down for the season this week. Devontae Parker has kind of been holding it down. He's been quietly at between 60 and 80 yards for I don't even know how long at this point. He's catching a touchdown every other game. He is the clear number one in that offense. I don't know who the quarterback is going to be week to week. It might be Fitz. It might be Rosen all of a sudden all over again. But, I mean, does this legitimately make Devontae Parker a potential top 24 receiver this year?
For the rest of the way, yes. I don't think he's going to be productive enough to end up as a top 24 wide receiver. But, I mean, over the last 5 weeks, he's been the wide receiver 22. And while Peter Howard will come at us about vacated targets and whatnot, it's still a bad defense who they're going to have to throw to stay in games. So I think this speaks – I think this is a good thing for our guy Albert Wilson. I do think that Parker will get an uptick in targets. So yeah, rest of the way, I think he's a top 24 wide receiver, though I would have to check what his strength of schedule is the rest of the way. But I mean, with this injury, I think he probably is a buy for the second half of the season.
He does have the 8th ranked contested catch rate in all of football at 53.3% on 15 targets, which is a pretty good rate. He only has 4 drops on the season. That's number 12 overall in the league. And he is averaged a top 24 air yards, 22 overall in total air yards. Also, shout out to airyards.com and Frisco Josh. The NFL messed up their API, and I think they're going to be shutting down. But Frisco Josh has put in so much work to that site, and he has given us both that term. At least he made it mainstream. And gave us so much free data that we've even used to use the show. So I just wanted to give a shout out for that while I remembered and was on the subject. But going back to Devontae Parker, there are a couple of good marks to actually point to in his profile so far this season. I do think that Devontae Parker, like you were saying, is a great bet to be a good buy for the second half of the season. I would potentially say moving forward as well, because he's stuck to that team for the next couple of years, and it's obvious that they're still working on whatever they have to work on when it comes to their wide receiver room. I anticipate that they add somebody next year, but I mean, looking at the Miami Dolphins team, you can't point to a single position group and say, oh, well, they're going to add here, because they have to add everywhere. So they only have so many picks at some point. I don't know how many bodies are going to come in there, and if Devontae Parker is the number 2, number 1 wide receiver again on that team next season, who knows all over again. We just kind of have to keep hope alive at this point.
And really not the worst schedule the second half of the season either. He has the Colts this week. Buffalo's a bad matchup. Cleveland hasn't been that good against wide receivers this season. Philadelphia's got a bad secondary. The Jets have a bad secondary. The Giants have a bad secondary. Cincinnati has a bad secondary. So the playoff schedule specifically looks really, really good. So, yeah, I mean, if you're looking for we'll call him an under-the-radar pickup at wide receiver, Devontae Parker's it.
Terry McLaurin, he was blowing the doors off early part of the season with Case Keenum. Dwayne Haskins came in. He hasn't necessarily shown to be the same player in the last couple of games. Do we think that this is something systemic with Dwayne Haskins, or do we think that Terry McLaurin is just going to have those games because he is still a rookie? As much as people try to anoint these guys so early, do you think he's just going to be up and down, or do we think that maybe we saw a boom that isn't his true level, and Water eventually kind of finds its level in the NFL.
I don't think it's necessarily he's playing over his head. I think a lot of it has to do with the quarterback situation and the fact that he's really the only pass catcher that you have to worry about on that offense. So he's getting that kind of superstar treatment. Dwayne Haskins has looked horrendous, and somehow he won another start because of the strides he took last week, which is like, what strides? So
basically, we have to figure out if we can start this guy or if we have to draft a new quarterback.
Right. So I think his ceiling is capped with Dwayne Haskins for the rest of the season. But with Haskins, I mean, it's tough to gauge last week because the Buffalo Bills are a very good defense. They do have a bye week this week, I believe. Is that right?
Yes.
And so coming out of the bye, I would probably feel a little bit better about Haskins and McLaurin. He's getting a couple weeks of prep, and I'm trying to see who they play in week 11 here as I am vamping. Well, we record. They play the Jets. So the Jets have given up a lot of fantasy points to wide receivers, have given up a lot of fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's not a bad matchup to come off of a bye with. So I think there is a comfort with Haskins when it comes to Terry McLaurin. I think he will be targeted a significant amount. And it's not the worst matchup in the world. So hopefully Haskins does take strides. I mean, he's he was their 7th overall pick, something like that. Regardless, he's going to get his chances to play, and hopefully the fact that they played together, McLaurin and Haskins, leads to more targets for McLaurin in the future.
Yeah, I think everything is kind of in flux there. I do think that people are quick to anoint rookies. I mean, it's going to be tough. Like Sam said, he's the only target of any note on the team. So regardless of his talent level, he's going to get the number one corner week in, week out as a rookie on a team with a questionable quarterback. So keep that in perspective if you are getting sour on Terry McLaurin. I do think he's still incredible talent that has the potential of being a top 24 wide receiver for the foreseeable future, even as soon as both this and next season, if you can kind of keep it, if you can kind of find a way to right the ship for the rest of the season while Haskins starts. Now, we make fun of John Gruden often. Chucky, as he's called, the HBO show, what was that called? Hard Knocks was one of the most watched things of this offseason just because of the Oakland Raiders on it. But it looks like the Raiders are actually kind of finding a way into valued football. Now, it doesn't mean that Derek Carr is pushing the ball down the field, because that's not what Derek Carr does. But Darren Waller's having a breakout season. He was just signed to a new long-term contract. We've seen touchdowns galore from Foster Moreau over the last few games. They don't really even have a healthy Tyrell Williams, yet they're still playing good football, and they're still finding a way to be 500 and probably be the second most winning team in the AFC West when it's all said and done. Are the Raiders for real beyond Josh Jacobs and maybe Darren Waller? Is there any value there, or is this a team that is just going to be so changed next season with all of the incoming parts that we can't really take this season for anything that's predictive of the future?
I think the big question is at quarterback, obviously. Because, I mean, Tyrell Williams, I don't remember what his contract was, but he's there for a couple years. Renfro is there for a couple years or a few years. Josh Jacobs is obviously a first-round pick, so he will be there for a few years. They're also very young on the defensive side of the ball, and they lost their star or their rookie safety, Jonathan Abrams, to a torn rotator cuff. Something with his shoulder, I can't remember. this could, I mean, again, really depends on quarterback, but even if they keep Carr, this could be the trend. They could be trending up because they're so young and they're so good right now. Or not so good, but they're so young and they have a lot of good pieces to build around. And I hate saying that as a Broncos fan. A lot.
That said, the Broncos did get a win this past week. Noah Fant put up, I believe, 130 yards. Everyone was anointing, myself kind of included, was anointing the other tight end out of Iowa, TJ Hawkinson, as the tight end to own coming out of this class. But our entire offseason spiel was really around Noah Fant. He's getting the targets now. We've seen him be able to catch the ball, and we've seen him drop all of the balls. What do we think is the truth behind what the Broncos can be on offense with Courtland Sutton and Noah Fant moving forward once we get a quarterback?
I mean, Grant, it's Brandon Allen. Brandon Allen threw for 193 yards, so take whatever with a grain of salt. I'm not – we'll see what Drew Lock can do, I suppose. And I do think that he will. It really actually, honestly, it depends because the AFC West is somewhat in the air right now. If you think about it, the Chiefs are 6-3, the Broncos are 3-6. Nobody's pulled away yet. Patrick Mahomes is coming back, so we'll see what happens. But even with Patrick Mahomes, I believe they lost back-to-back games. So if the Broncos defense continues to play like they have and Brandon Allen can be a game manager like he has been or like he was in his first week, maybe we don't see Drew Lock. So I can't, it's hard for me to answer that question. I can answer for sure that Courtland Sutton has taken a monster step forward in year 2, and it doesn't matter what wider or what quarterback he has. We saw that catch last week where he just like floated in the air and stole an interception away basically. And that's what Courtland Sutton's good at is those 50-50 balls. And I think we can for sure say that Courtland Sutton it will be a star in this league in the future. I think Fant will too. I mean, look what he did last week. Like he broke tackles. He is a 6'5", 250-pound freak of nature, like 4'5", 40-yard dash freak of nature. And he can work on his hands. So I think both are going to be stars. It's just a matter of who is going to be throwing the ball because obviously with Joe Flacco, Sutton was fine, not so much Fant, and the Broncos weren't good with Joe Flacco. So that is the other. I mean, there's a lot of things in flux right now in the AFC West when it comes to quarterbacks outside of Kansas City.
Little information on Courtland Sutton. Number 18 overall in contested catch rate, 45.5%. Number 11 in yards per route run, which is one of the most predictive metrics for wide receivers at 2.74. This is a guy that is showing, like you said, that he can be a legitimate star in this league. 15 overall in terms of yard per target and 18th in yards per route. He's already showing that he's a top 24 receiver this year. I think that's pretty well established. The numbers are showing that. I think he has the potential to be a top 12 receiver with a good quarterback. I just don't know how that's going to happen in Denver if they keep winning because I don't know what is there with Drew Lock, but I do know that next year, there's a number of highly valued quarterbacks coming out in the draft in Joe Burrow and Tua Tagovailoa, Herbert. There could potentially even be Fromm if people still believe in him. Are the Broncos going to have a pick that's high enough to get any of those guys? Or are we kind of just going to have to go with the status quo or maybe even look into a free agent a la Cam Newton next year to solve that quarterback position and really get those guys somebody that they can count on week to week to help them put up fantasy points?
Ewan Hogue, I swear to God, Ewan Hogue with Drew Lock. We have yet to see that guy throw an NFL pass, and we're like, well, that guy doesn't exist.
I just think that Drew Lock is one of those quarterbacks that is a guy with arm talent and not much else. And, until we see different, that's kind of going to be my perception of him. But, yeah, if he throws an NFL pass and he's good, then great. But if he comes out, first of all, if he's forced to play, that means the Broncos have dropped another couple of games. So if he's forced to play, then the Broncos are already in that situation. If he comes out and he's good, then, I mean, great. Then the Broncos have a quarterback in the future. But if he comes back and he's kind of middle of the road or he's not good at all, then the Broncos have, a 6-10 record. Kind of it's way too far to move up into the draft and get one of those quarterbacks, and they're in this situation for the next few years. I think that's the real fear from, people kind of trying to take the whole thing into account, kind of stepping away from being a fan just a minute.
Oh, stop it. See, now you're throwing shade at me. Why are you throwing shade at me? Let's see the guy throw a pass first before we drop him. This defense is good enough that they are going to win a couple more games. And if you look, I mean, they have a tough schedule down the stretch, yes. But this defense it has been playing so well that they will win a couple more games. In terms of this quarterback class is another question. I mean, I do like guys like Justin Herbert. Joe Burrows is probably going to be the QB2 this season. After that, it kind of gets dicey. Jake Fromm has been fine, but he's more of an Alex Smith. And then, I mean, so they would have a chance at a quarterback. I just don't know if they take it. I think they probably give Drew Lock a shot after the season. Unless they get like a top 3 pick, I don't think they're going to go quarterback this season.
Because of the success of a guy like Lamar Jackson, do you think that Jalen Hurts finds his way into that conversation at the end of the season and is kind of there around, the 15th through 20th, 25th pick that the Broncos are likely to get?
I mean, he needs to be in the conversation because he's been very efficient throwing the ball. He's been better than Kyler Murray throwing the ball, just in terms of efficiency. He's as good of a runner as Kyler Murray, but he's bigger. I mean, they definitely need to be taken into account. It's just whether you believe John Elway is actually going to change his mind about what a quarterback should be in the NFL.
That is true. Now let's talk about one of your favorite subjects.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I can't.
Kareem Hunt is set to come back in this next game. We've already seen some split touches between Nick Chubb and Dontrell Hilliard and the other running back they have, Dearness Johnson, I believe. Do we think that Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb are going to kind of dampen another's fantasy value moving forward? Or, I mean, is this still Nick Chubb's backfield to lose?
I mean, dampen in terms of Chubb will dampen Kareem Hunt's value, yes. Nick Chubb, listen.
I don't think he's going to take the job, but I've seen from Freddie Kitchens that he intends to use multiple backs.
And that's fine. Nick Chubb is still far and away the best. And I swear to God, if we're going to have this argument again, I need to do something to calm myself before we do this. Nick Chubb is, I will say this again, arguably the best rushing running back in the game. Like, he is matchup proof at this point.
He's not offense proof. That's the thing. I feel like Nick Chubb is really, really good, but he can be so much better on a competent offense, and that's the real issue right now.
Right. Yeah, and that is, I mean, it's a valid point. I mean, you're not giving the ball to arguably your best player on the offense, and I guess I just don't know what. I mean, you make a good point. I don't know what Freddie Kitchens is going to do, but listen, I mean, Nick Chubb, he's one of the best in the NFL right now. I don't want to talk about this a ton.
Let's move on.
I don't know. I do think that all of Hilliard's touches probably go to Kareem Hunt, but there's still the question of whether Kareem Hunt will be game ready by next week. Well, whether he will be in shape for next week, because he did have that hernia surgery. He hasn't really been able to work out all that much. So that's another question that we have to ask ourselves.
Let's go from one committee backfield to another. In Arizona, David Johnson has come out and said that he's going to be playing this week. Chase Edmonds was good last time that we saw him play before his injury. And they just signed Kenyon Drake off the street. Well, traded for Kenyon Drake, essentially off the street. I think it was for a 6th-round pick, so close enough. All of them have had success in that offense catching the football. We've seen Chase Edmonds and Kenyon Drake, at least in the short time that we saw, have some success on the ground as well. Do we think that all of these guys are kind of used and have earned some playing time moving forward? Does that really dampen the value of David Johnson, who was really reliant on his receiving workload game to game?
So I think Edmonds is still likely out another couple weeks.
Yeah.
So Drake will take that Edmonds spot in this offense. So he will get his touches. But, I mean, you brought up the best point here is that David Johnson is arguably the best pass-catching running back in the NFL. He can run routes with the wide receivers. He can line up in the slot. They need him on the field. So I'm not concerned about David Johnson moving forward, getting touches. And, yeah, I mean, I think that's it. I mean, we saw Edmonds get touches, but it's not like he would vulture a touchdown here and there, but it's not as if Edmonds was like just taking all of like 50% of the touches away from DJ. And I still think that's going to be the case here, is that Kenyon Drake will get those Edmonds touches. We'll get 5 to 10 carries a game, but David Johnson's going to be on the field a majority of the time.
When all of these guys are healthy, is there any, I mean, does that change your perception at that point? Does maybe things get a little bit more muddy at that then?
Not for me. I mean, if you look at the snap counts here, David Johnson played in 60% or more of the snaps in every game, and 70% or more of the snaps in every game that he was or 70% or more in 5 of the 6 games that he was healthy. And like I said, like David Johnson presents a matchup issue for the Cardinals because he can run routes with the best of them, because he is so lethal in the pass game. He needs to be on the field for the Cardinals to be successful on offense.
They just don't have that many targets outside of him. I mean, Christian Kirk has dealt with his injuries so far this year. Larry Fitzgerald, he's had some decent games, but I mean, he's also not been the most consistent target. Beyond that, they don't really seem to trust their rookies all that much. Keyshawn Johnson was really hyped during the offseason, but he hasn't done much so far this season. Andy Isabella, yeah, he caught the long touchdown, but that's his first play of note this entire year. So, yeah, like you said, I think it has to be David Johnson by necessity more than anything, just because there's very few pass catchers to really challenge him on that team. All right, so now let's go into this week's Dynasty Diagnostic. Our episode 52 roster was submitted by Johnny. You can find him on Twitter at Profinesser. I don't even know.
Profinesser, I think. Profinesser _ at Profinesser _
These names are just going to be the death of me so far this year, Sam Lane. Anyway, find him at Profinesser. Please be sure to give him a follow on Twitter. If you want to be part of next week's show, go ahead and follow the Dynasty Diagnostic on Twitter. Smash that subscribe button, and please, please, please leave us a review at the link in the description on iTunes. If you want to get to the front of the line and give our sponsor, Fantasy Data, a look, let us know that you did. Send us a roster, and we can get your roster on the show.
But all right, so I've had a couple interactions on Twitter about when I ask for updated rosters and people being disappointed that we haven't gotten to it earlier. I get it. And when Aton says get to the front of the line, he means get in front of people who haven't done this. So everybody who wants their roster diagnosed on the show has been giving us a rating and review on iTunes, has been following the show, has been doing everything we ask. So we need everybody to practice patience here, because we understand you want your roster diagnosed, but so do hundreds of other people, and we will get to you in due time. We only do one a week. So when I reach out to you for an updated roster, I don't need your snippy little remarks to me because we didn't get it to it sooner. I get it, but we're doing this for free and you didn't pay us to do anything. So relax. We will get to it. And when I ask, and that's why when I message you to update your roster, it's because we want to get accurate, or we want to be accurate about your roster. So everybody needs to relax. Your roster will get done in due time when we get to it.
Guys. I mean, Sam wore a singlet for all of you guys on Twitter. There's a video out there that's floating in ethos.
I'm going to have to wear another one too, by the way.
He might be the most angry fantasy football analyst in the entire community. Don't add to his stress. Don't make Sam sad. Don't make Sam mad. It's not something that you want to do. It's not something that the show is about. Please be patient. We promise we will get to you eventually. 52 episodes in not 52 weeks. I'll tell you that much. We've been pumping them out, so just give us a little bit of time and we will definitely get to you. But let's start on the roster that we have in front of us this week. It is a 12-team, 2-quarterback, point per reception league. At quarterback, we have Patrick Mahomes, Jameis Winston, and Baker Mayfield, along with Ryan Tannehill, who is relevant, as we kind of all thought he would be at the beginning of the season. I mean, quarterback, Patrick Mahomes, Baker Mayfield, I think those are good long-term quarterbacks. Jameis Winston, I don't know how to feel anymore.
Oh, sorry. I had to.
I feel so conflicted about Jameis Winston, which is, I'm sure, how Bruce Arians feels and how Tampa Bay feels. I don't know if this guy's going to get re-signed. Like, every time you think that he's a decent quarterback, he comes out and has a 5-interception game. Every time you think he's done and dusted, and that's the end of it, he comes out next game and he throws 3 touchdowns. So you really don't know what to expect from Jameis Winston. I do think he'll be starting somewhere. I don't think that'll be in Tampa Bay, but I think that's kind of where we're at this point. Ryan Tannehill is better than Marcus Mariota. I'm going to say that. I'm going to say that loudly and proudly. John Hogue, if you're listening, as well as Dynasty Outhouse and all the other people who thought that way. J. Mike, you're right in there with it. But I don't think Ryan Tannehill is a long-term fit for that offense. I do think that Tennessee is actually going to be in the market for the Cam Newtons, for the free agent acquisition quarterbacks this offseason, because they're a good enough team to not get that pick. So I think that is going to be a situation to watch during this offseason. But for the purposes of just looking at this team, Mahomes, Winston, Mayfield, Tannehill, you have 3 starters next year, the way that I'm looking at it, pretty much guaranteed. Ryan Tannehill could potentially still be the quarterback in Tennessee as well, so that could be up to 4. You don't have anything to do here. In fact, I would probably be looking to – I mean, it's hard to trade Mayfield now because of his play so far this year, so I'd be looking maybe to find a win-now team that maybe could make some use of Jameis Winston that will take that risk and maybe move him off the team for extra pieces. Again, sight unseen, haven't seen the rest of the roster yet, but that's just something that I would do with this quarterback room, just kind of looking at it off the top.
Yeah, I think I agree. Winston's going to be a starter somewhere. I saw it was just a fanalist tweet about just like quarterback carousel chaos and like Jameis Winston coming to Denver, and John Hogue almost had a heart attack. So, but yeah, I mean, he's too good not to start, but he's not like good enough to be on a team where he's going to be like the focal point. Like he has to win them games. So yeah, I think you had 3 starters. I honestly would not be surprised to see Tannehill still be in Tennessee next year. I mean, he has looked good these last 3 games. The way that team is built is around defense and the run game. And so they just need a game manager type. And Tannehill has, I think, proven through at least these first 3 games that he can be a game manager and more. So I would not be surprised to see him as a starter. You do have some picks here, and we'll talk about. In a 2 quarterback, I don't know how comfortable I am with this. I think you're fine for the season. But for me, I need another solid starter. And I think I agree that if somehow you could trade Winston and a first for, let's just say, somebody like Matt Stafford, I would be doing that in a heartbeat. But yeah, I mean, just to get like that solid second starter while Mayfield struggles through his early seasons. I don't know who else could he trade for here.
I mean, I would probably I'd be going the other way with it. Like, I don't think that a solid starter is really needed because, like I said, I do think Jameis Winston's going to be starting 16 games for someone somewhere. That said, I'd probably be looking at those guys that people think are left for dead. So I'd be looking at Cam. I'd be looking at Ben Roethlisberger. I'd be looking at those guys to acquire right now cheaply that might be able to kind of fill in that gap next year for this team.
And that's fair. I mean, and even like a Kirk Cousins, like if you could get Winston, trade Winston for Kirk Cousins or Winston and a first for Kirk Cousins and the 2 QB, I would. I mean, Kirk Cousins is the QB8 right now. Since week 5, he has had 4 games of 23.5 or more fantasy points out of 5. So they're throwing the ball more often here as well. So I would feel comfortable with Kirk Cousins moving forward as well, but that's just me. Apparently that's just me.
I think Jameis Winston isn't far out of that top 12 as well.
No, he is. But
yeah,
do you
10th overall? He's above the best, actually.
There is a difference though between consistency and Jameis Winston. Jameis Winston, though, I mean, in terms of fantasy, it's a valid point.
Because volume with Kirk is there. Volume is not anything that you have to worry about with Jameis, which is his appeal. That and the talent of his wide receivers. The
only issue I have with Jameis is you have to absolutely consider that he may not be actually starting as some. I mean, we saw what happened last season where he was in and out with Ryan Fitzpatrick, and that very easily could happen because, listen, he's got 2 games of multiple interceptions this season. He is, I believe, second in the league in interceptions. The dude is volatile when it comes to being a good quarterback in the NFL.
Yeah, it's one of those good for fantasy. Who knows for real life situations that you just
he makes such stupid decisions that he has to throw himself out of those stupid decisions. So that's why you get 300. You have a consistent 300-yard performance.
Jameis Winston gets his own garbage time show title right there. Done. All right, so now let's move into running backs. I don't even really want to talk like what's the point of this running back room. CMC, Saquon Barkley, David Johnson, Aaron Jones, Mack, Geis, Edmonds, Mostert behind that, Darwin Thompson and Trey Carson just for funsies. Like,
you say the name that I want you to say. You missed it. How did you skip over it?
Ogunbowale? Yes. Is that the name that you want me to say?
Yeah.
Dare Ogunbowale. Anyway.
You know the only reason I know how to say that name is because of you.
Yeah, there's so much talent at running back on this team that, number one, I'm upset that David Johnson is stuck here because I don't even think that you're starting him every week, and that just is upsetting to me as a fantasy football player. I think he should be starting somewhere every week. Also, you don't need him on this team. You have CMC, Barkley, and Aaron Jones on this team starting if you need to start 3 running backs at all. And then you have Mack and Geis backing him up. I don't think Geis is done and dusted. People are offering like second-round picks for Darius Geis at this point, and I don't think that we've come to that yet. But, I mean, at the same time, like, I think that there is a glut of running backs here. I don't think you need them all. I think that's going to be better served trading one of them, namely David Johnson, or maybe Geis plus for an additional wide receiver for reasons that we'll talk about in just a second here. What is your take on this running back group?
I don't know how you can get any better. CMC and Barkley, like, that's ridiculous. Yeah, I don't know how you could get better. And you make a valid point with David Johnson, and I don't think you can trade him away right now. The one person I might be trading away because of 2020 is Marlon Mack.
Marlon Mack. Yeah.
If I could trade Marlon Mack in like a 2020 first for, like you said, a wide receiver upgrade, I would be doing that in a heartbeat because David Johnson's coming back. You have CMC, you have Barkley, you have Aaron Jones, and I forgot to put this down, but I believe it's start 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, and a flex.
So you need that third wide receiver anyway.
Yeah, so you need another wide receiver, and you would be not starting one of the 5 starting running backs you have, and then you have Geis coming back as well. So yeah, I mean I'm probably trading Mack in a first for a wide receiver help if you can.
Yeah, that's definitely the play here. For you, it'd be Mack. For me, it's David Johnson. I kind of share the same reasons for why you would want to move Mack. He wouldn't be my choice because I think you can wait for a couple of weeks, have a couple of good games from David Johnson, then kind of reevaluate at that point.
And I get that. And I think if we're looking at it from a right now standpoint where David Johnson has been injured the last couple of weeks, we saw Kenyon Drake be successful. We saw Chase Edmonds be successful. David Johnson's value is probably a little bit depreciated at this point. So yeah, if you with this team, you do have the option of being patient and then trading away. But if we were looking at it from this point in time and this team and what those values are, I think Mack is the play here. But that's yes, fair. If you wanted to wait and see David Johnson get a couple more good games under his belt and then trade him away, and probably him and Edmonds away, then I would do that.
Yep. I think we are kind of lockstep with that point. Wide receivers, Davante Adams, injured so far this year. Some inconsistency as well, but we know the talent and we know the need because of the lack of real big days from Allison or MVS on the Green Bay Packers for Davante Adams. So we figure he'll come back. Cooper Kupp. Is Cooper Kupp a top 10 dynasty wide receiver at this point? Is he higher than a top 10 dynasty wide receiver at this point? For me, I think the fairest place to put Cooper Kupp is outside of the top 5, but in that top 10. Where are you with it?
I think there's an argument that you can make that he is a top 5 asset after these last 2 seasons, top 5 wide receiver. But yeah, I think to be fair, I think it is top 10, but there's an argument to be made about top 5.
Yeah, there definitely is one. I won't get into those points. You guys already know how I feel, but I do think that he's definitely eking up there. Beyond that, however, T.Y. Hilton, you just talked about him being injured. He's been in and out of the lineup. He's 31 now, so things are going to go downhill regardless. And also, he has an unsettled quarterback situation. So everything you don't want in a wide receiver, T.Y. Hilton is doing for you right now. So I think that's something to kind of keep in mind. Beyond that, A.J. Brown, Deshaun Hamilton, Geronimo Allison, Josh Reynolds. Maybe Josh Reynolds is something because Brandon Cooks went down. Maybe all those targets go to Gerald Everett, and Josh Reynolds is what he's been all year. Geronimo Allison is not going to be a Green Bay Packer next season. Deshaun Hamilton, I mean, I don't think that it's fair to really judge much in Denver because of the unsettled quarterback situation. But Deshaun Hamilton, if he was going to be involved, you would think he'd be involved now. A.J. Brown, I love A.J. Brown as a player. I think Corey Davis is a good player too. I really do. I know it doesn't sound like that, but I do. I just think they're in really, really crappy situations, and I think the presence of the other one in that offense, and an offense that isn't going to be a high-volume passing offense, is going to severely dampen the value of the other one in that situation. So I have serious concerns about A.J. Brown, really relying on A.J. Brown anytime soon until we figure out what Tennessee is going to do at quarterback. So, yeah, you need a third wide receiver here. At this point in time, who do you think is acquirable? And who do you think can serve as that solid third wide receiver for you for the end of the season and moving into the future? Who's the perfect buy at wide receiver on this team?
Juju Smith-Schuster.
I think that is correct as well. I don't know how acquirable Juju Smith-Schuster is again after his decent week this last week. I think people are kind of really up and down on him because the people that have him are probably frustrated where they drafted him, but at the same time, they don't want to move him. But yeah, if you're looking for a guy that's underperforming, I think it's Juju. I think people are more frustrated with Stephon Diggs than they are with Juju Smith-Schuster because I think people kind of understand where it's coming from with Juju because of the quarterback situation. I'd be targeting Stephon Diggs for that reason. I just think he'd be just a little bit cheaper. And if I couldn't get Stephon Diggs, I'd probably be going after Allen Robinson.
I mean, there's a lot of guys here where it's just like, yeah, I mean, he's probably gettable. Allen Robinson, you made a good point. Even with the poor QB play, he was on pace for before last week. He was on pace for 1,200 yards and I believe like 7 touchdowns. I don't know if you can get Kenny Golladay, but with the assets you do have, like you have 2 2021sts. If you can trade Mac and like a 2021st for Kenny Golladay, I would love doing that. Allen Robinson's a good one. Cortland Sutton, probably
too expensive.
Yeah, too expensive at this point. And especially because he is the wide receiver 1 now. But yeah, I mean, maybe OBJ. I mean, there might be some frustration with OBJ as well, and some concern after this season. I think the point that we're trying to make is look at some of the wide receivers that do have value or that have depressed value because of panic. And like we talked about, OBJ, Juju Smith-Schuster, Allen Robinson a little bit, Kenny Golladay. If people are panicking on killing Kenny Golladay, I don't know.
Touchdowns every other game.
He's a wide receiver 13 right now. I believe I called him a wide receiver 1 before the season started. So
he is.
We'll see how that goes. But even like Devontae Parker, we talked about him earlier. If you can get him for, I wouldn't even need to. I mean, would you trade
probably
Marlon
Mac for Parker plus a pick? Maybe is probably
that's what I was going to ask you. Would you trade Mac for Parker straight up at this point with this team if you are in contention for a championship?
See, now that's tough. That's really tough because I don't think that there's long-term plays, but I don't necessarily know if that's a long-term play with Marlon Mack either because I get what you're saying with the 2020 class. It feels dirty to trade a guy like Marlon Mack for Devontae Parker, but that's definitely something that you need to think about.
Another one, Tyler Boyd. I mean,
I would for Tyler Boyd.
People are down on Tyler Boyd right now, but he has 6 double-digit fantasy games.
He's going to finish with 1,006, and people are going to be upset with it.
Yeah, and even in his bad games, like the last 2 weeks, he's had 23 targets. He's caught 11 for 120 yards. Is that right? Yeah, 120 yards. And he just hasn't had the touch. He just hasn't gotten the touchdowns this season. Yet he's sitting there as the wide receiver 23 on the season. So I mean, I would feel very comfortable with Tyler Boyd as my wide receiver 3 on this team. So there's a lot of options, and you have a lot of assets to trade away for good young wide receivers here. And you don't necessarily need to sell young assets to acquire like older talent. Like we're talking about guys like Juju, like OBJ, like Tyler Boyd, like Allen Robinson that
package up a quarterback with a guy like either Mac Johnson or Geis, and I think you can get anybody you want.
Right. I'm wary about selling a quarterback with his quarterback situation right now. But the point is, you don't have to buy older assets to win now. You can buy younger assets to win now and help yourself in the future.
Even if they're underperforming this year,
right.
Even if you don't see them really being what they're going to be in the future this year.
Right.
You just need some sort of consistency from the wide receiver 3 spot is kind of what we're saying at this point. Moving on to the TEs, I think this is the one area that you do really need some help in. All of our trade packages that we talked about earlier on this roster, I think we should rescind them all and include a TE in every single one of them. I'm going to go through them here just so you guys know. Howard, Ebron, Burton, and Hollister. I don't know what's happening with O.J. Howard. O.J. Howard is not used. Everybody that dunked on the people that were laughing at people that thought O.J. Howard wouldn't be used because Bruce Arians doesn't use tight ends. I don't know what to tell you at this point. but it's happening. Eric Ebron, I mean, he's a punt tight end play at this point. I think he's been that ever since Andrew Luck was no longer part of the Indianapolis Colts roster. Trey Burton, Jacob Hollister, I mean, they can get you a 0 as easily as they could get you maybe a 6-point touchdown, none of which you're going to be very, very expectant of. So I think those are guys to stay away from. But if you had to buy a tight end right now, who are you buying? For me, I think the guy that I'm buying 2 guys. I'm buying a guy for a long term, and I think I can buy a guy that will help me through this year. I'm buying Jason Witten just to get me through the season, and I think for a long-term play, I'm going to buy Foster Moreau.
I would not be buying Foster Moreau personally, but that's me. Because Darren Waller did just get that extension, so
he did. But I also don't see much wide receiver talent on that team. I think they might just be a 2 tight end system moving forward.
I would not be surprised to see them go wide receiver this in 2020. But
they could.
I really like Darren Fells. Yeah, he is very reliant on touchdowns, but when you are a top target for Deshaun Watson in the end zone, probably don't need to be that scared. And he has 1, 2, 3, 4 double-digit games since week 3. He had a touchdown last week as well. So he's maybe not heavily involved, but he's involved enough.
Touchdown on one target. One target, 1 catch, 1 touchdown.
That's fine. No, I mean, he had 3 targets. Relax. He had 3 targets. But he's since week 3, he has had 6 touchdowns. So he is a guy that Watson is targeting in the end zone. And if I'm looking at your tight ends, I'd much rather have Darren Fells than any of your tight ends right now.
There's a guy long term that you think that's acquirable. I mean, David Njoku definitely comes to mind, but beyond him, do you think that there's anybody that's going to get you long-term value at tight end?
Mike Gesicki. I mean, he's been involved lately. He had his best game of his career last week, 95 yards. He's had a couple 8-point fantasy point days. He's got a few. He's had 2 or more. This is going to sound bad. Sorry. He's had 3 or more targets in 7 of 8 games this season. So he's been much more involved. And maybe it's not next year, but in the following years, I think Mike Gesicki is actually a good buy in terms of tight ends, because people just don't have patience with tight ends, even though literally every analyst on the planet says tight ends take it at least 2, if not 3 years. And a lot of tight ends don't break out till their second contract. But still people go, well, this guy is going to have a breakout moment in his rookie year. Stop it.
I had a conversation with somebody recently that I actually want to bring up now. So somebody wanted to trade for Noah Fant at tight end. I didn't have Noah Fant. I offered them O.J. Howard instead. And they had completely different values of the 2 players. They felt that Noah Fant was, had the pedigree of being a top tight end, and they didn't see that O.J. Howard had that same pedigree. I think it's really, really important for O.J. Howard owners right now to understand that you don't need to sell. There's no reason to sell. Right now, you're not going to get value for him, first of all. Number 2, he's still a tight end that is in the process of working it out. We could definitely find him on a new team next season where he's a focal point of that offense. I don't think the issue so far this year is that he's not being a good player or that he's showing things that take away from what we think he is as a player. I think he's not getting an opportunity to be involved in the passing offense because of the explosion early on from Chris Godwin. Now what we're seeing from Mike Evans. So, I mean, is O.J. Howard a guy that you're looking to acquire right now in Dynasty?
Absolutely. I mean, especially, honestly, it might be, what are you dying on? You don't get a cough while I'm talking, Aton.
I thought I was muted. Muted?
No, you're not muted. I'm leaving this in because you're a ridiculous person.
Oh my God. I haven't been using my mic this entire time. I'm not muted. Anyway.
So if you look at his first 2 seasons and then you say, okay, well, let's look at this third season, and you take away from that he's not a good NFL player or a good tight end, I don't know what to tell you. It's a bad season. He's been injured. It's a new offense. There's a multitude of things that are working against him, and he's still only 24 years old, a 24-year-old tight end, and he probably hasn't had his quote unquote breakout season. So if you can buy him for a second or a third round pick right now, I would be doing that in a heartbeat.
Oh yeah, OJ Howard has to be on the top of your wish list, just because we've already seen him be an effective tight end in the NFL. We already know the rarity of that. And like Sam said, he's 24 years old. He's very close to his second contract as it is. There's still a lot of value in OJ Howard. But talking about this tight end group, you have OJ Howard, but you need somebody for this year. Your guy would definitely be Darren Fells.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, if I look at what exists and who's been like successful, you bring up a good one in Jason Witten, but he just, I don't know, like he's kind of just like mediocrity for me. Like he doesn't have a high upside, but I mean, maybe that's all you really need for this team to be in contention. But yeah, over the last 5 weeks, Darren Fells has been the tight end 6. And I just don't think he gets a lot of love for what he's been doing, especially lately.
Yeah, he's a monster in the red zone, and that's all that's important at tight end, because all you need them is to catch 1 touchdown, and they're a top 10 tight end on the week. So that's just something to keep in mind. But let's take this overarchingly. Let's look at this as a whole. What is this team to you, Sam Lane? What is our final diagnosis for this squad?
Now I got to get in the mindset of cars. I mean, honestly, the only major issue I see is at tight end. You do need a wide receiver 3. Everything else you have to be in contention at this point with this team. So maybe it's like, view it as like a NASCAR race where your tires are getting worn down. You have to go into the pit and get refueled and get your tires, new tires on. Basically, your car's running fine. You just need a couple things to get it up and going and be the fastest car on the track.
Yeah, this is a Ford F-150 for me. I mean, this is a strong, powerful team. It's definitely got huge advantages at almost every position. I think you pretty much have an advantage at every position other than tight end. I think tight end can be fixed relatively easily here. At wide receiver, that would be the one thing that you kind of need to add to this team to make it really worthwhile. But I really do think that you have a very, very competitive team here. I mean, this is, I'm trying to think of a luxury car that isn't too luxury, but like is all like it just is a team that's going to pull through. And I think that's what I was going for with the truck analogy at the beginning. It's a team that is strong enough at other places to kind of paper over the cracks that you have elsewhere. But those cracks might show themselves in the playoff weeks. So that's why it's important between now and whatever trade deadline is in your league, or if your league doesn't have a trade deadline, when the playoffs start, to really shore up those 1 or 2 spots that you have to, just to make sure that you are one of the top contenders come playoff time. Now moving into, before we return the keys, I just kind of wanted to talk about just what you've thought about this season so far. Have there been any lessons that you've learned this season as an analyst, just kind of looking at what the NFL landscape has become, that you think that you're going to move forward into next season as kind of something to keep in the back of your line that you maybe didn't consider as much previously?
I think the big one that I've taken away thus far is injuries, or about injuries, and not making too much of injuries. We've seen Emmanuel Sanders come back from a torn Achilles. We've seen Demaryius Thomas come back from a torn Achilles, even though they're both older wide receivers. We've seen Cooper Kupp become a top 5 or be a top 5 wide receiver this season, despite tearing his ACL. So I think that's one of those things where it's like, I think I've learned that don't overemphasize injuries. Yes, we do have some things like guess who has a hamstring injury? Will Fuller. So it's just one of those things where it's like, yes, take injuries into account, but don't just fade players because of said injuries, especially in this day and age where the technology is good enough that players are able to come back as good at or better than they were before.
Yeah, that's definitely a huge thing. I mean, you would have missed out on Cup, you would have missed out on Fournette, you would have missed out on a lot of guys if that was your mindset before. And for that reason, the thing that I'm learning is, I mean, if there's value, if there is an edge in value at Dynasty that people don't value their assets as they should, it's at the tight end position. It is 100% at the tight end position. Will Dissly right now, if you can get him anywhere, you should be doing that. Guys like Darren Fells came from the woodwork. Darren Waller came from the woodwork as well. There is value to be mined at the tight end position because people don't know how to value those assets because they're combustible. Because it's one of the most injured positions in the league and one of the most injured positions in all of athletics. I understand that, but because of that, it's very, very valuable to have multiple tight ends on your team so that you can get over these injuries really quickly and still be able to field a solid player at that spot. So for me, it is definitely pay more attention to the tight end position. It's one that people don't give enough credit to. And it's one that people think that they had figured out at the beginning of the year, but we saw, with the fall off of O.J. Howard and whatnot, that there is just a lot of potential growth for these guys. So stock up at tight end. If that means having 5, 6 on a roster, hoping 3 of them will work out, I think that's the best way to do it rather than going into the season with one guy or going to the season with, 2 older guys and thinking that that's going to get you through the year. I really do think that there's hidden value at tight end, and that would be the one thing that I put out to the ethos. But that is it for today. Thank you so much for listening. Please make sure to follow your head technicians at ETAN Mozia, for myself, Eitan, and at FF Stompy for Sam. Also go to the Dynasty Diagnostic podcast feed on iTunes. Give us a 5-star rating and review. Really helps the podcast grow and reach more listeners. Thanks for making it to the Dynasty Diagnostic Service Center today. Please be sure to keep up with all your scheduled maintenance and catch us next time to ensure quality performance. See you on the next visit.